Gopal, maybe you could set it out for us, the legal aspects, and of course we'll keep coming back to you. Thank you. So you're our first speaker.
Thank you very much, Ms. Seema Mustafa, for the opportunity to share my thoughts on the cataclysm that has occurred and is still unfolding in Hathras, with a focus on how to prevent the repetition of this horror. I think the theme, never again, is extremely important as an aspiration, and we must always strive towards that aspiration. So thank you very much for organizing this, and I'm honored to be here with two very, very distinguished panelists, for whose contribution and experience I'm truly humbled. I thought to myself that I should talk about the issue naturally from a legal point of view, because that is my domain. I'm a student of law. But I thought I should avoid two things. One is I should avoid talking about issues that are still sub judice because of my involvement with the law, and maintain that propriety lest it be misconstrued. And the second is there has been extensive discussion in the media about the legal aspects and the failures in the legal system. And if any of the members of the audience are interested, there is a really outstanding interview with Advocate Brinda Grover, available on the Wire site, in which she explains in very clear detail the issues involved, again without prejudicing what is going on in the law, but explains what the legal failures are and legal changes in this case. There is no doubt that the failure of the legal system with respect to the victim in this case is undeniable and total. There is almost no part of the legal system that has worked. There are hardly any principles or rules of law that have not been violated or ignored in this case. The most egregious amongst these include the failure to take the victim's statement, and the failure to register a proper FIR as required by the law, including Supreme Court judgments, recording her statements, the failure to promptly gather evidence, her medical neglect and the failure of medical personnel to take note of a sexual assault, the huge attack on her family, who are the victim's family, as if they are the offenders, the illegal and inhuman disposal of her body,
Your microphones, your noise, where the children are shouting. Your microphones.
So
yes, I think it's better now.
The attempt to subvert the investigation and to protect the accused by the state itself at this very early stage, virtually constructing the defense case for the accused. These are all very egregious failures. They've been discussed extensively in the media, continue to be. I thought what I would do is speak on two issues today which have received less attention. First, how should the public understand these legal and constitutional failures in Hathras? Are we understanding them correctly or not? Second, of course, the main theme of our discussion today, what should we do to ensure that such a legal and constitutional failure does not happen again? On the first issue, my submission is that the cataclysm in Hathras has been largely reported and discussed as the failure of the legal system and as a failure of governance, the criminal justice system, and as a failure of governance, which of course it is. But what has not received the attention it deserves is that while what happened is tragically,
Doctor?
when it involved
Doctor,
Dalit
हे
women.
यांना
Yes.
पाहायचं आपल्याला यांना पाहायचं तर काय दाबायचं
Mute your microphones, people. We can hear everything you're saying. Please mute. Thank you.
What has not received the attention is
कॅमेरा चालू करायचा आहे का?
नुसतं ऐकायचं
मग ठीक आहे.
काय दाबलो तुम्ही
काहीच नाही.
मग मला दिसत नव्हतं
तुम्ही गडबड न करता तुम्ही
Is that you? We can hear you. Can you mute yourself, please? Please.
Himani, I think you as a host can mute everybody.
Yeah.
You don't want. You can mute them if they are not muting.
Yeah. Okay. I was just being a little democratic. We'll do that. Manoj, can you mute everybody, please, except the speakers? Yes, Professor Gopal, now we can go ahead.
Sure.
Everyone is
Sure.
muted.
No problem. So what I was saying was that what we've seen is a focus on what's been going on as a failure of the criminal justice system and as a failure of governance, which of course it is. But what we have not given enough attention to is the fact that while an attack on a young Dalit woman, and indeed Dalit men as well, is not uncommon in our country, these are no ordinary crimes. These are extraordinary crimes. And that's what I'd like to focus on today. Why is an attack on a Dalit woman, twice unborn, first unborn as a woman and then unborn as a Dalit? Why is an attack, a brutal rape and murder of a young Dalit woman, an extraordinary crime in the eyes of law and in the eyes of jurisprudence? There are three reasons for that. First, the victim's status as a Dalit makes the crime an atrocity under the law. Now, in 1989, India adopted quite an extraordinary piece of legislation for our country, not globally, defining any crime committed by a person who is not a member of a scheduled caste or scheduled tribe community against a member of the scheduled caste or scheduled tribe community, an atrocity. And under section 311 of this act, the Scheduled Caste, Scheduled Tribes Atrocities Act, whoever assaults or uses force to any woman belonging to an SC or ST with intent to disrobe her or to dishonor or outrage her modesty commits an atrocity under the SC/ST Atrocities Act. So we know that what has happened is definitely within the purview of the Atrocities Act. Why we need to understand atrocity as an extraordinary crime is that it involves a crime which is committed because of a social prejudice, a social attitude of one community to another community. And that's why, although it continues to be a crime, like any other crime, it gets elevated to a special crime because the victim is victimized by mere membership of a social group. And therefore, the idea of an atrocity is a very significant type of crime in law. It is comparable in the parlance of global law to a hate crime, as we know. A hate crime is a traditional offense like murder, rape, and so on, with an added element of bias, social bias, or any bias, ethnic bias, race bias. A hate crime is defined as a criminal offense against person or property motivated in whole or in part by an offender's bias against a race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, gender, or gender identity. the concept of a hate crime became widely noticed globally when 3 civil rights workers in the United States were attacked in June 1964 by white supremacists, by white racists. And this was the famous Mississippi burning case, which became also a Hollywood movie. And it became the largest federal investigation ever conducted and led to the conviction of several white supremacists who were sent to prison. 7 of them were sent to prison. And therefore, for a second reason, what happened in Hathras is not an ordinary crime, because it is also, in the understanding of global jurisprudence, a hate crime. And that is also an extraordinary crime. So there are 2 counts on which what happened in Hathras is an extraordinary crime because it has a social dimension to it. Third, I would argue that what happened in Hathras is not an ordinary crime because it also is an act of genocide under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which was unanimously adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1948 and came into force in 1951. India is a signatory to the convention. Now, what is a genocide? Article 2 of the Genocide Convention defines genocide as any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. So that you want to destroy in whole or in part, if your motive is to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group, then that is an act of genocide. And these acts include killing members of the group, and even killing one member of the group is enough, based on the ethnic identity of that person and for no other reason. So it's very comparable actually to the Atrocities Act, which seems to marry the idea of genocide and the idea of a hate crime to create a very significant and powerful offense in our country. Second, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. Both of these are satisfied in this case. Deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, and so on and so forth. I'm not getting into the other conditions that are not relevant here. But even killing a single person constitutes an attack of the community, because ultimately the community is a collection of individuals, and therefore killing a single member of the community is attacking the existence of that community in part, if not in whole. And therefore we see, for a third reason, that what happened in Hathras is not an ordinary crime, it is an act of genocide. And there is a very interesting Maharashtra case that I would very briefly refer to. I think I've got another 5 minutes or so. I hope I'll get another 2 or 3 minutes, Seema, because of the lost time. There's a very interesting case in Maharashtra called Kailash Wadekar, which involved a brutal attack on a tribal woman by an upper caste community in Maharashtra. And the judge of the district court who wrote the judgment convicting the accused of offenses under the SC/ST Atrocities Act said very brilliantly, to rebut the prosecution argument that there was no tribal certificate to prove that this victim was a tribal. The judge wrote that women of all communities are punished, but there are different ways in which different communities, the women of different communities are punished. This woman was stripped of her clothes, paraded without her clothes through the village, was beaten with slippers while she was being paraded without clothes in front of the village. He said, this is a type of punishment that is reserved for the SC/ST. No other community is punished in this manner. Therefore, I do not need a certificate to establish that she is a member of the scheduled tribe community. Now, this is an act of genocide because it is meant to weaken and destroy the community, not simply directed against the individual who takes that attack as an individual. So we have in our law also recognized that this kind of attack is actually an attack on the community, and if that is the case, then it amounts to an act of genocide. We should not forget that until independence, until very recently, many Dvija male communities and Savarna male communities had a tradition of being able to rape women of Dalit communities in particular, including having the bridegrooms present the brides to the landlords to be raped, soon after they get married. So we have a very long tradition of Savarna males raping Dalit women. And today, after independence, they have to chase them and capture them like predators, capturing their prey. But we must remember that this is including the punishment of cutting off the tongue, of breaking their bones. These are all traditional caste punishments. And rape itself is seen in the traditional system as a right of the upper caste. And therefore, we must place this Hathras incident in the background of the continuation of a particular tradition of a legal and justice system in our country, a system of justice that I would call a Savarna justice, where such actions are not seen as crimes. Of course, if the reverse happens, then it is a crime, but not the upper caste, especially, or the upper caste attacking lower women. So we now must turn briefly to ask ourselves, what is the real root cause of, if we want to make sure that Hathras never happens again, we have to attack its root cause. And its root cause is actually this extraordinarily violent and extraordinarily divisive and dehumanizing ideology, the Chaturvarnya ideology. If there is any ideology in this country that is anti-national, seditious, dividing people against each other, making people attack each other, making beasts out of men, it is this Chaturvarnya ideology, and it is the most important obstacle to the fraternity and integrity of our society and our country that the Constitution speaks about. So the first point I would like to make, I'm making only 2 points, the second one will be more brief. The first point I'd like to make is that the cataclysm at Hathras must be seen not just as a failure of law or governance, which it is, but it must also be seen as an atrocity, a hate crime, and an act of genocide, all of which can be traced back to the ideology of Chaturvarnya or the caste system, and can be overcome only by social reform and a revolution in the social structure of power in our country. That takes me to my second and last point. What can be done from a legal point of view to, once we diagnose this as an extraordinary crime involving not only the commission of a crime in its immediate sense of the word, but also an atrocity and a hate crime and a genocide, what can we do to fight against these extraordinary crimes of atrocity, hate crime and genocides occurring in our country, which is as an integral part of our whole social order. So my suggestion is that our response to Hathras should put on the front burner the issue of the role of the caste system of Chaturvarnya specifically. It's not enough to say that it is casteist in vague terms. We must identify the problem as the ideology of Chaturvarnya, and we must go back to the 1936 specific agenda enunciated by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar for the annihilation caste. He has, and I come to that very quickly, a very specific agenda for attacking the caste system. And unless, so long as Chaturvarnya exists, I'm afraid these kind of crimes cannot be stopped. And so what do we do about that? We need to first of all recognize this issue, and particularly our main political parties and political commentators need to finally accept the centrality of the problem of caste and the centrality of the agenda of annihilation of caste in our country after 70 years of independence and 84 years after Ambedkar's speech, if we still are not convinced that caste is simply a dissoluble part of the superstructure and the base is simply the economic relations, and so we don't really need to confront Chaturvarnya without recognizing that Chaturvarnya is a combination of economic relations, social relations, and political relations, and it will not dissolve by itself. It will not be destroyed economic relations or political or social relations, that we must go back to the end of Ambedkar. Then we will not be able to make India a safe place for the outer. Very quickly, Ambedkar said in relevant part 3 operational points in his 1936 response to the comments of Mahatma Gandhi on his annihilation of speech, annihilation of caste speech. He said, first, Hindu society must be huge agendas, but completely neglected by the mainstream of this country. First, he says, Hindu society must be reorganized on a religious basis, a theology which would recognize the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. To some extent, this has been done in Kerala, my state, by Narayana Guru. He was pioneered theological reform that brought liberty, equality, and fraternity into the center of his religion. Of course, he denied that there is anything called Hindu religion. He said there is no such religion, but into the religion of the masses. Second, Ambedkar says that in order to achieve this object, the sense of religious sanctity behind caste and varna must be destroyed. The religious sanctity behind caste and varna must be destroyed. Very big challenge, but he says it's necessary. Third, he says the sanctity of caste and varna can be destroyed only by discarding the divine authority of the Shastras. He didn't say destroying. He says discarding the divine authority of the Shastras. So he's got a formula, a remedy for the root cause, which I think we have to take into account seriously. And inasmuch as it is a normative agenda, and the core concern of law is normative, we must turn to integrating these ideas into our jurisprudence and into our thinking about law. Now, we must also recognize that what is not simply in any of these. I do not believe that what is going on is a sudden collapse in our legal system or our criminal justice system. I think what is going on in this context is that the idea of justice of the legal system is shifting from the constitutional idea of justice based on liberty, equality, fraternity, socialism, secularism, democracy, right, rule of law, to Savarna justice, the Savarna idea of justice, where what is seen as an offense against the Savarna values and principles is rapidly dealt with. There is no failure of the system. So we saw Prashant Bhushan offending the Savarna social order value by attacking key people in power, and the conviction, his conviction for his tweet came within 48 days in the highest court of the country after he issued the tweet. That shows the efficiency with which this system can work when Savarna principles of justice are questioned or attacked. But when the opposite happens, suddenly the system falls apart, because the system is not intended to be operated to advance the values of the Constitution, and partly because the institutional structure of the police and the judiciary has been inherited from the 1935 Act and which in turn goes back to very feudal roots. And so we need to understand that what is going on in our country is not a failure of the legal system. It is a reversion back to an idea of justice which the Constitution tries to replace with a modern, progressive, liberal idea of justice. And therefore we have to, once we see it that way, we have to redouble our efforts to make sure that the idea of justice of the Indian courts is aligned with constitutional ideas of justice, and we fight the incursion of these fascist ideas of justice into our legal system. And this will, of course, require building new capacity in the legal system. But first of all, this requires recognition of the problem of Hathras in the ways that I've described as basically a crime based on a hate crime, an atrocity, and an act of genocide, which is driven by the ideology of Chaturvarnya. And the challenge it puts before all of us, whether we are lawyers or not, is how do we implement the agenda of Ambedkar or another effective agenda to face the challenge of annihilating this ideology, which has generated huge amounts of violence against the common people of our country. Seema, I think I'm at 20 minutes, so I'll, with your permission, stop here, and I'd be happy to join in any further discussions.
Of course. Thank you. That was a very solid, and as one of our members from the audience said, very powerful presentation. So thank you for that. Now we will ask Brinda Karat to speak, please. The floor is yours. Brinda.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Seema. And thank you, Professor Mohan, for putting it absolutely correctly in the absolutely correct perspective as far as the Hathras case is concerned. There's absolutely no denying it, that it was driven by caste, it was driven by the caste code, it was driven by Manuvadi practices and ideologies. So that was a very powerful and a very important beginning to this discussion. So I'm going to take it from a slightly different aspect. The first point is that the family right now, because, you know, I had been part of the Left Party's delegation, which had been to Hathras, and we spent quite a lot of time with the family. And I'll just spend a few minutes to tell you what the situation is there in the village now. As you all have read in the media, there are only 4 Balmiki families in the village, and all 4 of them were basically landless. This family has 2 bighas of land, which is not very productive land. So the main occupation of this family are as agricultural workers on the lands of the landlords there, or the, I would say, little bigger than a middle peasant, between a land, I mean, like a better off peasant in that area, who are mainly Thakurs. And this village is surrounded by 15 to 20 villages, which are dominated by the Thakur community. So the first aspect there is that all these years, this family has been very dependent on the Thakur landowners, and their relations have been shaped by that basic social relation between a worker and a landlord. And it is a subordinate relationship driven as much by class as by the fact of the caste. So here we have a poor family in a small minority in the village, and a family which is dependent for their livelihood. For example, even the supplementary income which the family has, which is through animal husbandry, is purely dependent on the landlords to allow them to go to their fields to cut the fodder. And this is, of course, very common in most parts of at least North India. And we have found one of the most critical aspects of Dalit women's vulnerability to sexual harassment and assault is precisely this subordinate relationship based both on caste, on class, and on landlessness in many of these areas. And specifically now, with the takeover of even panchayat land, which used to be available to Dalit families as common lands, in this entire area, that land has also been taken over by commercial interests. So basically they are, just to live and to survive, completely dependent on the upper caste and the landowners. So when we went to this village and understood the context, the first point is, I mean, I'm not going into the details of the case because all of you know that, but one very important aspect is, and we have seen this again and again, that is the capacity of a family to survive such a huge tragedy. For us, it is a barbaric atrocity. Along with that, for the family itself, it is a huge tragedy. So at least my first concern was, what does the family have in the terms of capacity to be able to overcome this tragedy? Secondly, what capacity is there in the present situation in which they are situated for them to be able to fight what all of us have defined as one of the greatest and gravest injustices and a naked subversion of the law, the regulations, and the basic responsibility of the government. And the third point is, can they fight at all? And when we spoke to the family, I think one thing which comes out very clearly is that there is a real fear of whether they will be able to at all survive in that village. And what the district magistrate said so cruelly, which was caught on camera, that don't forget, everybody will go, but we will be here, is actually the reality. And the family does feel that they will require to be relocated. They're going to find it terribly difficult to live in that situation. So now, in such a scenario, what is a critical aspect here is the politics of it. As Professor Mohan has said, we are living in a society, a so-called modern society, which deeply entrenched birth-based systemic discriminations and violence called the caste system. And this is existing everywhere in different degrees. But what is the difference in this case? And I think that is what we also need to take into account. This happened in Uttar Pradesh. I can tell you, if it had happened in any other state, I would not have gone to the family with these deep concerns. This has happened in Uttar Pradesh. And under the present regime and dispensation in Uttar Pradesh, the caste code of the caste brotherhood of the chief minister overwhelms everything else. Just this morning, I read in the papers of another case. Similar member of the chief minister's caste brotherhood was a Swami, Chinmayanand, a serial sexual harasser which was reported to the courts. So this is not defamation. These are cases in the courts. We were involved in the case. I had been to jail to meet the young victim, 22-year-old girl. Today, I have read in the papers that she has come to a compromise and she has turned hostile in her own case. And I thought to myself this morning when I read it, that really those of us who are fighting for justice, unless we see the politics of it and the reality of power relations, This girl was a Brahmin. She was not a Dalit. But so strong. Is this caste brotherhood? And is the issue of power and economic power? And so divorced are the ordinary avenues of justice that every citizen of this country constitutionally has a right to. So divorced is it from real lives and government processes and government interventions in favor of the rapist, that you don't stand a chance. This girl was locked up because the rape that was perpetrated on her was not seen as a crime as much of the fact that the accused reported to the police that he was being blackmailed by her. Now, I don't know the circumstances. I know girl very well in her family, and I know the circumstances. But the fact is that the SIT, the courts, driven by the government agenda to save the accused because of caste relations, caste commitments, and political affiliations, they did every single thing to make it impossible for the girl to do anything but compromise. So this is a case in which there is a Swami involved, so-called God-man who has a bunch of followers, and every day they were demonstrating in his favor, while this poor girl was running from one place to another just to find shelter because she was so scared that she was going to be killed. And I had that in my mind, the whole case, when I went to Hathras. Of course, Hathras was different in the sense that because she was a Dalit, the certainty of that rape and the certainty that she would be murdered if she dared to speak, that was 100 times more than in any other case. But the politics of it, that is why I say that if a rape case of a girl, a Dalit, who's also poor, happens in Uttar Pradesh under the Adityanath government, you have far less chance to access justice if the same case had happened in any other state of India. I think that is the nightmare reality we are faced with. And I saw it at every single step of the case, hearing the mother speak. And I have to speak. I don't care if the case is sub judice or whatever it is. The fact is, we have fought for those anti-rape laws. Since the Mathura case, we've been out on the streets fighting. We have fought to say that in the first instance, if a girl's appearance, if she's got blood in her clothes, if there's bleeding from her vagina, if her private parts are bleeding and she's not able to speak, her guardian, her mother who was there, who saw her in that condition and who took her out in that condition to the police, she told me, she said, they never asked me if they can examine her. There were no women there. There were only male cops. They kept her on a slab. And do you know, my dear friends, the cruelty of it, they had to send the mother and the brother out to look for a tempo because the police could not even arrange to take her to the hospital. This is the kind of degradation that a poor Dalit girl faces in a police thana in Uttar Pradesh today. And so she was banged into this tempo, bleeding, taken to this other Hathras hospital. The same thing happened there. And the mother says, it took hours. I've seen the entire case papers and I've seen all the timings which have been given. There's a big discrepancy between the timing that the family says and the timing in the sheets which have been put before the courts. I mean, that's a different matter, but there is a discrepancy there. And this discrepancy is important because I believe that girl could have been saved if she had had money, if she'd been richer, if her parents could have taken her to a private hospital, she would have been alive today. So those timings of the medication, the hospitalization, etc. And of course, even there, they did not ever ask about the nature of the case. She was in terrible pain. So the first point is, in the very first instance, whatever we have fought for, whatever the appearance of the girl in that examination should find a reflection in the first information report that was denied to this girl. My question is, if you are bleeding, yes, we fought for consent of the girl for a medical test. That was a different context. But if a girl is not in a position to give consent, and if the entire case history, the appearance of the girl presents itself in a particular way, what are you waiting for? The brother was not present as a direct witness, nor was the mother present as a direct witness. So how can you trust their and use their FIR to deny the girl the minimum medical treatment and medical examination she had a right to? And when they took her to Aligarh, the same thing happened. There was no counseling for this girl. There was no approach to understand what had happened. Why? Because the system does not believe that a Dalit girl, a poor Dalit woman, has a different experience. And we have seen that most women find it extremely difficult. It takes sometimes ages, my dear friends, to report that you have been raped. I mean, look at the best of, educated women who can't even report that they've been sexually harassed in their workplace because they feel so embarrassed and they feel their status is going to be affected. And a 19-year-old girl in front of her parents, and she did say zabardasti. She said, "Mere saath zabardasti hua." But they ignored that. Whether the brother ignored it, the mother ignored it, because they didn't want to think that their girl had been raped. I mean, I didn't ask those questions. But did the girl say at the beginning, right there, public statement, "Mere saath zabardasti hua hai"? So that is the first crime. And that gives you an indication that the power of the Thakur landlords in that area, who are the cops in front of that? And then they destroyed the entire evidence. And that IG, he should be sacked by now. How dare he say that girl is not being raped? How dare he? Does he not know that the dying declaration of the girl is the basic document? He's still there in his position. No action has been taken against him. What is the message which goes? And then, after all that, they brought her here and she died. They didn't allow any of us to see her. Many of us had gone to the hospital. But that's okay, because that was a COVID situation. I can understand that. But we all know what happened at the time of the cremation. The Allahabad High Court has taken suo motu notice of it. That's fine. But look at this. Think of this. They go for a CBI inquiry. Why? Because Allahabad High Court had already asked the right questions. So they go for a CBI inquiry. And what do they do in the CBI? They equate the rape and murder with this so-called conspiracy, international conspiracy, that these are all the people who, I asked the DM, the ADM who was there when we went, I said, is it an international conspiracy that the girl was there at that time in the field and she was raped? Was it an international conspiracy? That her spine was broken and her tongue was bitten. And then she was killed. But what have they done? In the CBI, they have equated rape with this so-called conspiracy. And they have asked the CBI in the same case reference, to do an inquiry on both these aspects simultaneously. And in the CBI reference, they have not taken the dying declaration of the girl as the reference point, but they have taken the first FIR in which the brother says that this is how he found and this is what happened. He didn't even know when he gave that report. I spoke to the brother. He says, I was just completely confused. I didn't know what had hit me. Had no idea. Whatever my sister was saying to me in a broken voice, I just repeated that. I just wanted to save her. I couldn't see myself. I mean, can we as human beings not understand that? Doesn't the law recognize that? Of course it does. But the CBI today is using that first flawed FIR instead of the dying declaration of the girl. And in the meanwhile, they've got this accused, the main accused, Sandeep, to give a letter saying, I have a relationship with this girl and the family did not like it. And that is why it's the brother and the mother who have killed the girl. Can you imagine anything more horrendous? But this is UP. This is what happened in the Budayu case. 2 young girls were found hanging from the tree. Till today, they have not really identified who have raped them and who have hanged them. They say it's an honor killing. So the family was questioned. In the earlier Unnao case, where the BJP MLA, also a Thakur, raped a 17-year-old girl. That girl lost her father. She lost her uncle. Her aunt was in an accident and died. Her father was beaten up by Sengar's brother, and they continued in the way that they were for 1 whole year until the Allahabad High Court intervened. What is the message? That if you are a girl in Uttar Pradesh who is raped, you better come to a compromise, because you're not getting justice here if your rapist happens to belong to our Baradari, both political and caste-wise. And that is what is happening in this case. The CBI inquiry, the Supreme Court, I don't know what the Supreme Court is going to do. Why the Supreme Court suddenly wants to be that active at also, I don't know. Yes, we do need a court-monitored inquiry. That's clear enough, but we don't know. I mean, the Allahabad High Court is looking at it. It has taken certain, important positions. But quite frankly, in today's India, I mean, as a person who's been 50 years fighting in the courts, outside, in parliament, outside, whatever, we have never seen this, where the entire judicial system, the credibility of it is under so much. There's such a deficit of trust. So I don't know whether the Supreme Court is better or Allahabad High Court is better. We can't shop for courts. We don't want to shop for courts. But I'm just raising questions as to why the Adityanath government wants a Supreme Court monitored inquiry. It's very puzzling to me. Because we know how very kind the Supreme Court has been on many occasions in deciding which cases have priority and which don't. And I've just come through this Swaminand, this Chinmayanand case, and what the SIT did there, and what the Allahabad High Court and then the Supreme Court did. So basically what my point is, this is a caste issue, this is a gender issue, this is as much an issue of class. We cannot forget that she was a poor, landless family's daughter. And that also gives power. And therefore, social reform today, it has to include other dimensions from where Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar illuminated the path against caste oppression, or Narayana Guru illuminated the path at a particular point in our history for social reform and for against caste oppression. We have to take it forward, because today, if in the 21st century, 2020, we have these retrograde practices, it is because the forces, the economic forces, utilize caste and strengthen caste to exploit the laboring power of Dalits. So if you want to fight caste, you have to equally fight class power. And if you want to fight Dalit women, for Dalit women, it has to be gender, caste, and class. And I think that's one of the biggest experiences of women's movements, organizations, and secular and democratic organizations. And in this, the framework is politics. You cannot get away from politics. You cannot get away from Hindutva politics. You cannot get away from the fact that Adityanath, a criminal who was involved in so many cases of hate crime as a member of parliament before he became the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh, he had umpteen cases against him. And he removed all of them when he became chief minister. This is a man who puts up photographs of people who are protesting against anti-CA and defends people like Chinman and then Sengar and the rest of this rotten lot. So don't forget the politics. There is politics. We may not be with any political party. I'm sure most of the people here are not. And I'm not speaking just as a CPM member, which I am, but I'm not speaking just on grounds of party politics. What I'm saying is you cannot get away from the fact that it is that power of politics represented by the BJP RSS, represented by the ideology they propagate. So we have to fight, and that is why most women's organizations have raised this issue. The chief minister of Uttar Pradesh has to quit. That is a very important demand, which is very relevant to the Hathras case. Do you know, till today, that man has not expressed regret. Yes, he spoke to the father on the phone. For what? Did he say, I'm so sorry that this has happened and I'm with you and I'm going to ensure justice? No. He assured them he'll give them some compensation. He's not made a single public statement, since the 14th of September, except to say how great Mr. Modi was, to telephone him and say that take action against the officers. Even that is not done. Anyway, my friends, what my point is that social reform, caste, gender, in the present economic situation, these things are all linked. So we have to look at poverty also, landlessness, and the importance of those issues to make Dalit women much more vulnerable than other sections of women to sexual assault. Secondly, there is a politics behind it in which directly the BJP RSS is involved. And thirdly, unless we continue and strengthen our solidarity struggle, I'm very, very concerned, extremely concerned, that in this case, the capacity of those who are being hounded today in every way to fight back is deeply strained. So we need a lot of support and a lot of solidarity to ensure that justice is done. Thank you, Seema. Seema, you're muted.
Thank you. I muted myself. No, I can see. Thank you, Brinda. This was, like I said, it's absolutely horrifying. And I think all of us are completely silenced. And you can see from the comments how horrified everyone is.